one of our American poet laureates named Richard Wilbur wrote a poem called The Writer. I'm going to start our conversation today by reading this, and I'm hoping it's useful. If you aren't a poetry reader, you may want to pause the video and read it yourself a couple times or go look it up. It begins like this. In a room at the prow of the house, where light breaks and the windows are tossed with linden, my daughter is writing a story. I pause in the stairwell, hearing from her shut door a commotion of typewriter keys, like a chain hauled over a gunwale. Young as she is, the stuff of her life is a great cargo, and some of it heavy. I wish her a lucky passage. But now it is she who pauses, as if to reject my thought in its easy figure. A stillness greatens, in which the whole house seems to be thinking, and then she's at it again with a bunched clamor of strokes, and again is silent. I remember the dazed starling which was trapped in that very room 2 years ago, how we stole in, lifted a sash, and retreated, not to affright it, and how for a helpless hour, through the crack of the door, we watched the sleek, wild, dark, and iridescent creature batter against the brilliance, drop like a glove to the hard floor or the desktop, and wait then, humped and bloody, for the wits to try again. And how our spirits rose when suddenly, sure, it lifted off from a chair back, beating a smooth course for the right window and clearing the sill of the world. It is always a matter, my darling, of life or death. As I had forgotten, I wish what I wished you before, but harder. Welcome back. That is, I know, a most unusual beginning. But that poem, of course, I have a daughter who is a writer, and all the baggage that he's bringing out is, of course, that of our experience as well. But I'm bringing it to you because we're having a conversation today about feeling in our form and the relevance of feeling. And I'm going to try to address something about this and try to broaden it out of a mere feeling to something perhaps bigger. And I'm not going to tell you I've spent a lot of time doing this in the public setting before. So a little grace. We'll see where we wind up, huh? Meantime, John Jensen, thank you. Benjamin Campbell, Adam Choquette, you guys have been there for such a long time and such big help. Thank you for helping us keep these videos going. For the rest of you, do subscribe, share, like, keep on doing what you're doing. Send in your commentary, your feedback, your whatever conversation. Alan Voss writes, in thinking about the progression from seeing to understanding to feeling in painting, first we learn to see accurate values, colors, edges, and relationships. Then we begin to understand why great paintings work, the hierarchy, design, and visual decisions behind them. My question is, where does feeling enter the process? Where does it enter the process? He could have stopped there, but let's keep going. When you look at a great painting by Kalf, Velázquez, Levitan, or another master, do you think the emotional impact comes naturally from seeing and understanding visual truth? Or is there a point where the artist consciously begins to pursue feeling and poetry as an objective of the work? In other words, is feeling the result of seeing and understanding deeply enough, or is it a separate pursuit altogether? Fascinating question. I reframed it a little bit. I just made it so it looks like this, sort of several points, and I want to just discuss a couple of these points freely, and then I'll pull up a couple of pictures and let's just talk about this whole idea. But the two things that I've talked about repeatedly, I think you could say, is, I should say are, I guess, are the importance of learning to see nature. And seeing is not just a thing in itself, it's the seeing and the reproducing of the color relations, the value relations, the proportions, and all that. So to be able to do it so that you can get the look of what that is in front of you, right? So seeing, he says, first we learn to see accurate values, colors, edges, and relationships, right? So to render them is the evidence that you're seeing them, right? They're hand in hand. Then he says understanding. And this is where I tell you what we're looking at, what you're trying to do. There's two pieces of this. One, you became a painter because art, right? You saw great paintings. You saw something that moved you and you said, yes, I must, there's a response in me to that, causing me to want to even pursue it, to do that thing. So understanding why great paintings work, the hierarchy, design, and visual decisions behind them. So there you are with a number of things, all excellent points. And then he comes to this third one, feeling, and which I've numbered as 1, 2, 3. Do you think the emotional impact comes naturally from seeing and understanding visual truth? Or is it a separate pursuit altogether? Now, I take that number A to be the Impressionist model. So when we're looking at nature, when we're pursuing it, when you're trying to make a beautiful likeness of it, to make it do what it does in nature, is making it just like going to be enough? And the answer, of course, is no, it's not going to be enough. That's why I say no matter what you're doing, you have to see the beauty of the relationships, not just the fact of the relationship. It's an odd thing, right? That beauty into truth thing is so, you know what I mean? It's so woven. Or is it a separate pursuit altogether? And that sets up you giving me an answer, and that is there a point where the artist consciously begins to pursue feeling in poetry as an objective of the work? And that is what you're going to find in a great many painters. You'll find that painters lose their way, that painters often are in a world where they're so preoccupied with the truth in front of them, and that I say the rightness of, the preoccupation with making it right, making it like, that they forgot what the point was. And that's why I say even in little things, if you can find the music, it's such a big thing to find the interrelationships of just the color red and what the play is like. You see what I mean? But of course, there's a bigger package than that. So, but is there a point where the artist consciously begins to pursue feeling in poetry as an objective of the work? And I would just point at virtually every great painter, there's a moment where that dominates. And it dominates so much that you know that it got in there early and often, you might say. And that's my experience. So if we're looking at a poem like that written by Richard Wilbur, you might begin to get an idea of how this little world is working that we're living in. And I'm going to just look at pictures first, and then we'll talk about that. But I want to come back to it, and with some idea of just seeing if we can talk about this idea of feeling, and how is feeling actually enough? Is it an adequate enough word for what we're talking about? Because what we're dealing with is at the very heart and soul of a picture. It's not whether you made a likeness, that's photography. But it's the expression of the soul. It's that thing around which your whole soul was circling and circling with the idea of enabling it or even embodying it. It's coming forth. The incarnation thing. That's why I keep saying it's such a big deal to use the word incarnation. Concepts take on form, right? Abstractions take on form, dreams take on form, visions, visual, but this whole idea of incarnation, of bringing it out of the spiritual, so we say, now you could say out of the feeling world, but out of the spiritual into reality, is the thing that I think separates the really great paintings from the world of really good art, and I say really good meaning in all the other ways, but that combination, we refer to our past videos, conversing about the it and all that sort of thing. Does it have the it? But you're talking about the role feeling plays and when it comes into play, and that's what I want to address. So, let's just look at some stuff here and see what comes of it. So here, just as an impressionist, you're looking at Monet in that first picture, that upper one there. Minimally, what you're looking at and seeing is a thing that looks like it's embodying the sensation of that moment. Now we know it's the color nose. He's trying to make it like and get the light, get the atmosphere, and all that sort of stuff. But you can see that there's this refreshment of like early morning light when it's so rich and so refreshing and so unbelievably chromatic. Yeah, rich. And yet there's a different statement between these two. So when you're out there, he might be out there just doing these things as different exercises at the same exact location. It certainly looks like it, right? But at a different time of day. And we know he uses multiple times a day and does this. Now, what you're going to discover when you're painting impressionistically, is you're going to discover the poetry extended beyond what you first saw. So you stand there and you think, wow. And then you begin working on it. And it's not because it's changing. If it keeps changing, then it's going to be a different poem, right? So by the time you get to the one down below, it's an entirely different poem, right? Now, this might have been an hour before the sun came up, just before this happened. And there's that whole time of morning that's like that misty, moisty coolness of the day. Or it might have been evening. Obviously, it looks like whatever it is, it looks like the same time of the day with the sun in the same quadrant, shall we say. But you can see that there's evoked an entirely different feeling. And by the time you begin to lay all these notes in, if you're watching your canvas, you're going to be aware of it. And there's something about that I think is embodied in the poetry that we just read. This guy has this first idea of just sort of discussing about his daughter trying to write something, and it was, in some sense, it must have amused him. This enormous force, bashing away on this noisy typewriter, and kabang, if you throw the carriage in those old ones, in this dead silence where nothing's happening while people are thinking or getting the framing right before they start typing again. Did the poem end there in that one idea? But you can see that in fact it didn't. It actually evolved. So he was continually opening himself up to more. And it's this receptivity of the yes, of something more and something other and something, and in what class, is it sometimes majestic, sometimes powerful, sometimes whatever. But you see that there's some evolution in the poem itself and in his own understanding and the breadth of the possibilities, So it may have started with a particular kind of feeling, but there's this huge empathy at the end that may not have been there for the first 9 lines or something like that. If you follow how this might be working. So when does that start coming in? Well, for an impressionist, you're going to have that initial thing, and then there's going to be this whole other evolution. It's going to be coming in as you go. I think it's going to be the same thing with imaginative work as well. It's going to probably work like that. But is it adequate to call it feeling? And yet it isn't inadequate. In fact, I may have some books in the house here. I've been a bit of a student of poetry, but there are some books in the house here that I think one of them is called Feeling in Form. Yeah, well, that's a pretty good assessment of what we're doing, right? But so you don't want to get past that point, though, that you're discussing. The first thing is empower yourself. The way Sargent talks about it, empower yourself to whatever you see in front of you. You can reproduce it. You can reproduce it with some alacrity, with some speed, with efficiency and well. Because your mind can actually be occupied with what? Well, this other stuff. This, what you may as well call emotional content, but I don't have it may not be an adequate word for it, but it's roughly in that category. There's something soulful that is looking to be engaged, right, and imparted and all that sort of stuff. Let's see what else comes out of this. I remember looking at this one early on in my training, and having I think this is one of the first paintings that I saw in person, where I got this sensation of something higher, bigger, deeper. Now you can say this might just suggest loneliness, or it might suggest the scale of man in the world. He's just a little piece of sand in a grand ocean, or whatever. Some of those, what are feelings that are evoked by that, right? Is feeling an adequate word, Sensation, evocations, but evoking, but is feeling enough of a word, is all I'm going to say, by the way, and I don't mean to pick on you for your word is the word we typically do use, right? But there it is, and Innes is sort of known for involving himself in trying to present if you want to call it a spiritualizing or draw a spiritual experience out of his what he was painting, to bring to you something else. And he would have used a word like spiritual. Millet, you're looking at Millet's. Look at these. What these things are evoking, particularly the two on the right. I mean, these three are all the same subject. They're the singular young woman with the task of caring for the sheep, the shepherdess. And here she is, sort of standing out of the sun, probably cooling off a little bit. Dog's keeping an eye on the sheep. Dog, faithful dog. But look at that. Look at that feeling of what you might call melancholy or loneliness, or what is it exactly? But it's at the heart and the very soul of this thing. Now, I could jump ahead. Maybe I just should, because let me just see, Mr. Producer, you want to just not run through all these with me, but maybe I could just jump to this one. I'm going to just show you the drawings I've shown you in the past, these right here. Is it not so that when you're a student, there's no such thing in one sense as getting it right, getting it like, if it doesn't speak what the model spoke to you, right? I'm only saying that to say, isn't that always there? These are student works. I shouldn't actually say that. These two are actually a bit later. But these three here are student works, and yet they have that what you might call unity of expression, at least these two outer ones that are from life models. There's something in that you're going to have sort of sitting before you, So that's where I'm trying to agree with you, that feeling is engaged on its own, but it's incorporative, right? One of the things I've said about gesture, even to myself, when you see a gesture here, and you can say, well, gesture, that's just the big movement, the big general line of a figure, some of the grand sweep of it, the movement other people use. Well, but how do you own that? And yet you must, right? And but the answer is, though, it's done significantly by feeling, right? And so, but there's a conceptualizing of the sense that this gives you, right? Again, feeling, right? So you're pursuing that, and you're doing it with each of these figures with their own poses. This one leaning in a little bit, this one leaning back against a wall, whatever that is. But you're trying to get the gesture, which is the life of the tilt, the lifeline, if you want to call it that. I don't mean in the sense of S-curves and things like that. I just mean that all these complicated angles and curves and forms and all this stuff, they add up to a singular gesture. Now, I picked that up very early, and I wouldn't tell you I was doing it very early. So these two are probably done with the gamma, which would have been 4 years into my experience. So that isn't like I'm coming from nothing. But I was well past the idea that the gesture, the life, somehow or others in this gesture, but you can only own the gesture in a, what's that, in a kind of an implied way, in a suggested way, in a perceived but not owned kind of a way, right? And in that, I use the word feeling. You have to own it in some other part of your anatomy. That's what I found. So let's get back to where we were. Maybe we could just keep moving from here. Well, actually, I think I better go back to where I started, because there's a number of things up here that are pretty significant right off the bat. But so you can see here that they're, undoubtedly I don't know if he started with that or he started with just a figure, and he, like when you see with Degas, he starts with a figure, then he adds another figure, but he doesn't look like he's looking for this expression of mood or, the melancholy of life. I remember the reading, and it's a worthwhile read, what's it called? The Romantic Manifesto by Ayn Rand. You might want to read that, and for the chapter in particular called Art and the Sense of Life. Man, I'm hoping I think it's in that book. Arthur Kunstler, is that his name? Kessler? Also writes significantly on the subject. But so there's something coming through, like in that poem, there's something that comes through. I've even attempted writing poems, and I've successfully done so, getting a line of thought, a very clear line of thought phrased out, and then watch the evolution of the poetry into the unity of who you are, right? Now, I would tell you that's felt and all that sort of stuff. It comes through perception, but I don't think the word feeling is quite adequate to describe what you're up to there and what's coming through that. And yet it's all coming in some sense through feeling, right? The idea of unity is a felt thing, how these things hang together. You perceive whether these colors are hanging together, right? Perceive, but you sense, right? Let's go on. So here in Bierstadt, and so you can talk about a lot of things. The idea of greatness, of grandeur. Who does that better than Bierstadt? I don't know if anybody in the history of landscape painting does it. I think you get a hint of it in Lorraine and maybe sometimes in Constable, or Turner sometimes, but I think less so than in Bierstadt. These guys are out traveling the West. The western part of the United States and also South America, and they were finding, they seem to be sightseers. And then they would just, you might say, park themselves. Now, I assume that this guy probably did drawings and brought all this stuff back. Maybe what he had was a phrase about how he was impressed by that, and he wanted to get across the impression of the sense of grandeur that this stuff did to him. If he only had a series of sketches, that would have been, that would have been done vicariously, shall we say, or virtually. But that's one concept, right? So now the sense of grandeur it's feeling, yeah, it's real. Or the sense of force, and I'm looking at this one by Rembrandt, power. This is a prophetess, the power of the prophet, right? It's a sort of a famous thing if you're reading Old Testament scripture. The prophets, they're bigger than life in some sense. So you find that, but there's a very clear sense of power, the musculature and the shoulders, all that, this prophetess. But it's also replete in the whole thing. There's the fullness of these forms. The sense of whatever. So what is that? Yeah. Well, it has to have been in there early and often, right? Now, this is imaginative working. So we're talking about that. Come down to Homer, and you're seeing the very idea of force. Rather than power, but the idea of force. The force of the sea. There's this relentless force, and even possibly causing a sense of trepidation, the possibility of being overwhelmed. As he stood on these rocks watching the ocean either come in or go out, probably come in perhaps with a storm in front of him. So you can see that there's going to be a necessity, obviously, of having a sensation in front of you, right? But when you're a student, it isn't your central mission. Your central mission is learn to hit a note and stay humble about it, right? Be faithful in little things. Don't feel like you're out there with the challenge of doing a great piece of painting. Do your very best to make something out of it, but your main job is to learn to hit the note, learn to get the proportions, to learn to get the angles, okay? To get the look of nature at an edge, to get the light effect, to get the form, to express these things as they come to you and in their interrelationships. You got a lot of work to do, right? But when doesn't this happen? So it's a good question. I don't think we need to go on forever. It comes in so many different forms, this idea of the feeling. Here's something that you just talk about, that aesthetic feeling, right? This isn't a storytelling. This one almost feels like you're having a social, there's a conversation about. But this doesn't. This looks like the dance of colors. You might want to just describe this as the dance of color patterns, or patterns and colors. Degas, what, right? But he's obviously getting, he's working on this work. It's a work of poetry. And as he's working on it, he sees that he needs a little more of something over here. He sees ways to improve the rhyme scheme, to improve the color scheme, to really work out the verticals and the interplay of whatever is happening vertical in this picture, or whatever's happening pink, or whatever, And he's doing all these things with much more of the idea of music. And I don't mean it in so much the aesthetic sense as the aesthete. This is the what do you call this? The aesthetic movement in this country, the arts and crafts model. But much more in the sense of what I'm going to call poetry. or even, I'm sorry, I meant to say music, but or even poetry in the sense of rhyme schemes and rhythms and things like that. So the interplay of all these things, and so he's out there watching this thing become music, right? And he's working like the poet, and these ideas are coming back and forth through him. He's starting to see the possibilities here of where this will take him next. He's one of the few people I find in painting who actually knows how to write a painting the way you would write a poem. But I'm not going to stay on this forever. You can see the moods of a Whistler, or I should say just the tonalist painters. They tend to do this. They tend to create a sense of isolation or quietness, or even you might call it a kind of a soulfulness. I don't have words for it. I don't know if, but you standing there and you're before a scene like this and you're impelled with a feeling, well, that's the driver. It's still hitting the note, but you don't want to be losing track of the feeling, right? Now you're talking still. Keep trying to remember that you're talking about a painter who's a trained painter who knows what he's doing. You're not just trying to figure out painting. That's why it gets so complicated. That's why Sargent says, though, you want to be so good at the basic things like of getting plumb and getting color relations, getting light effects, getting shape, and the interplay of those things. You want to be so good at those that you can keep watching for how the poetry is going to be coming about, right? But these, again, are just wonderful unities of expression. The whole color scheme here feeds beautifully into that idea of youthful love, you know. Even the shapes, the clouds, even the patterns here are fascinating. The way what is it about that, right? So is that in that class of everything driven by a central feeling? This thing I'm not so sure about what that is. When I'm watching all the rest of this stuff with this quiet thing, and then all of a sudden there's that wave or something of noise. But that's your job. That's your job, is to sort those things out. And if there's a thing that is, odd, fix it in the next one, whatever. This is a feeling, again, of something like, this guy's the explorer, and this is a portrait of an explorer, and his face looks like it could use some exploring, the terrain of his face, you know. What is Leighton thinking? But you can see, having this man in the studio and probably hearing conversations about what he's seen, what he's experienced. This guy doesn't have the eyes of an innocent child. These are the eyes of a man who's seen maybe too much and has had to bring courage, had to bring strength, warrior souls, a warrior's soul to his life, to his very. And look at the way Leighton allows himself to be so impressed with that this becomes a face, the rugged face of the whole entire land, the erosion of the forces of nature. So what am I saying, though? But don't you see, though, that there is this inspirational aspect of this thing? That's why I said there's a core in painting. In its inspiration, there's a kind of a thing that's inspirational, right? And you can't forget it. But that's painting when you're talking about being past being a student. Doesn't mean that when you're doing a still life, you ought not be trying to set it up. But you can't take 6 years to set it up so you can do one still life so you can learn how to paint a shape. You can't do that, right? So you got to make sure you maintain your focus. But to whatever extent you can allow that in and keep awareness, so that is all for the best. But as I've said before, even when you're just trying to get the angle right to a different angle and you become aware of the angle set, listen for the music. And you're in that place, even if it's just 2 or 3 things that you really must get right now. You're in that place. It's feeling driven. That's why I say beauty and truth are like this. They are just absolutely like this. They're interwoven. There's no getting out of it. I've said before that Vermeer there, whatever he's done with that poetry there, he's getting to the point of describing woman in the most magical way that I think woman can be described. I don't know if there's any nude I've ever seen that is as impressive. As I've said before, said to my students from time to time, if you ever find that in your pocket, just bring it to me. I'll pay you whatever you want. No, I'm kidding. I do that tongue in cheek. I don't encourage anything bad. But there is a painting that I would say, if you ask me about all the other paintings on the face of the earth, it might be this one I'd be wanting on my actual wall. It's an interesting thing, though, because there's so many levels of poetry in this thing. But you see that it has to have been evolved from a core idea, a central idea, or have evolved fully into a clarity about something even more profound at like a complex level of this one central idea, right? And that's often what does happen in painting. As I said, the thing as you begin to understand it better, that's why standing before nature and painting and studying it further and watching the relationships more, the interrelationships and all these different things, and becoming more and more aware of what it's doing and not just what it is in a photographic sense, you're going to be in the place of poetry and music. You're going to wind up there, right? Which is that sensational thing. It's that feeling-based thing that we're talking about. Am I getting a little long here, Mr. Producer? I better be scooting through. By the way, that Titian there, I think it is the greatest of all the Titians. I just think it is. Significantly for the reason we're talking about. Because it evokes so much. Now, I don't know if this is a good reproduction. Other reproductions I've seen still do what I'm talking about, though. And this feels like it might be just a bit inky. But it is nighttime. This is being conveyed. The body of Christ is being conveyed to the tomb in the night. And these people are on many levels of being disturbed. But there is this thing about their beloved, their friend and savior, that these people are fully engaged in a feeling way, right? So it's in their gestures, it's in the color scheme, it's in everything. It's just in everything. Driven by what? He's after an emotional sense of the thing. There's an emotional binder, an emotional core. But keep thinking about whether we mean emotion in the limited sense of, feeling sad. Are these words even beginning to be adequate? Feeling elegant, feeling giddy, all these things, are they? But, the complete human is more than that, right? And so what you're incarnating is soulful beyond that sense of feeling in a limited sense. And that's, you might say I'm trying to just add a little more to what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing much. I'm not even sure I'm disagreeing at all, because I think you're on the money. And I think it's a wonderful thing to have said too. Thank you for the comment, Alan. Nobody has painted a more soulful portrait than the self-portraits of Rembrandt. I don't think I've ever seen anybody do it, and I'm talking, including that one I just showed you a couple seconds ago. This is much more of a study of a terrain, and it's the character of a man, that sort of thing, experiences of a man. But I get the sense that the Rembrandt is, it's the soul of a man. You know what I mean? There's something about what he can do with human expression. I don't know if anybody's ever even come close. I just don't know. But then this is a whole different kind of expression, and maintaining the unity around one thought, and that is the thought of thought, right? This is the philosopher. Whoopsie. And you can see that we're maintaining the idea of the struggles of the mind to understand the very nature of light. But and this whole thing about the philosopher, and ultimately you wind up in this part, with the part we're at today, talking about the feeling, the feminine thing here, that we think that way about the feminine thing, but there's this thing about the warmth of the heart and the love and all that sort of stuff. And it's so easy for men to want to go into the mechanical and the physical and just stay there and stay there and stay there and forget the rest of it. But this is a grand philosophical statement, and it's unified by this twisted, convoluted, wondering moment. Here's the guy standing in the midst of all this stuff, in the midst of the light, between the light and the warmth, between the cold light and the warm hearth, and in the grand spiraling, world of thought, returning on itself. What is that? What's going to drive this? What feeling do you get out of this? I don't think you do get one in that sense, but you get a sense of truth, a philosophical sense that the guy grasped nature. That's us. That is what we're trying to talk about. This guy's sense, it looks like a sense of it's almost cynical. To me, it feels like the nihilistic mind. Is anything worth anything? Is there a soul anywhere? Or are we just blown in the wind? There's something in the direction of a philosophical statement. But these things, this is the very nature of our form, right? The flora. I think this is probably flora, but the picture of this woman becoming the flower, having the flower in her hand. The flowers, what are they, drifting away into the air? I don't know. I'd have to ask Benson. I haven't read anything. Maybe there's a commentary or two about what he's trying to do there. But what is the soul of this picture? Is the idea of the human and the flowering of the human, right? Is it? Or isn't it? You'd have to read the poem to find out. But what's going to hold this into a unity, if not this felt sense of things? Some of which is just coming upon you. You know, you have a pattern, you have a color scheme. It's all been given to you by this is a mural. This has all been given to you by what's happening on the walls surrounding. So all you have is something like a pattern that's probably going to go like this to look right in that space, a color scheme that's going to go like this, and then you're given a subject or you choose one. And there it is. And then, so this is the evolution of a poem, but it's got to get to the point, or it has to initiate with the point, of the thing you're trying to express. So I don't know, I said flora, I don't know what this actually is called. I got to get out of this. Pleisner and a couple other people are doing something significantly different. This is much more fearsome kind of a feeling, right? It's a little bit more terror. You see the storm coming in. And he probably sat out there and was looking at this boat. His beginning point was this boat with his eerie eyeball on it and his strange spiky unicorn horn coming out, tail. The whole thing being a bit of a monster of a thing. And then the several of them. And then all of a sudden, he sees these people and the other boats and all this stuff, and all this, it's coming together, isn't it? It's coming together. Did he start with it coming together? I suspect he went out there and painted from life, and he gradually began to see what he had here. And that's the thing. To have had something here means to have seen that, an emotional response. Now, what do we mean by emotional? But a felt response. I'm not sure I like the word emotion, but it may be adequate. It may be the only, but keep wondering, keep thinking that through for yourself. But you can see he was eventually unifying around this kind of idea of fear and something coming in, something ferocious, So is this the resistance of mankind against the grand forces of nature and all that stuff? And so it goes, I don't, in some ways, I don't even know where to go with these things. I used the word Japanese print a couple of times. I'm sorry to you guys who know who the artists are, but I pulled these up and then couldn't find where they were. In both cases, I just say Japanese print, and I apologize. It's not appropriate. But this one here, though, this is the mother and child thing. I don't think I've ever seen it done more sensitively, evoking that astonishing relationship, which so sums up, so much of human existence, right there, the mother and the child. Look at it. The colors are doing the gentility of the values scheme, the form, but the gestures, the holding, the touching, it's all there. It's all there. What is that evoked by, though, if not that sensation of something that can't be brought any other way except by mother, loving child. But it's sense-based. You can see that she's done a lot of these that don't give you that feeling. They give you a different feeling. Yeah. So you get something like that going, and then the game is to make sure you maintain it wherever else you work on a picture, to maintain that or to embellish it or extend, shall we say the metaphor, but the feeling, the sensation. I have to get out of this. We could talk about Aang that way and what this one is. Antigone brings something dark to this, but he's obviously onto it's a singularity of feeling. I love Antigone because he's got this astonishing sense of form. Unfortunately, one of his pictures in Boston, the portrait of one of our mayors or governors, has just turned completely black. I hope that hasn't happened to most of his work because he uses some strange concoctions over on top of each other and stuff like that. Bitumen might have been one of those things where Munkachi and others suffered really serious damage to their work. But the unity, the sticks, everything about this thing, but there's your crying prophet or something or other, right? Getting into the act, into that. So was this coming forth from the idea, right? From the idea that first we had a piece of nature that evoked, and it's always feeling, isn't it? It's always feeling based. So why not? I got to get out of this. I think we're there. We've covered the territory. Guys, we are doing an intensive in the fall, if you haven't heard that yet. I'm looking forward to having a full house. We have room for 16, I think we have 16 beds, and you're all going to be, you don't have to, but you can be living there and working there in the same spot, painting the figure indoors and outdoors. The Boston School thing, and what's more beautiful than Boston in the fall and the New England in the fall? But the Boston School thing, painting the figure in interiors and outdoors, right, in the landscape. And that's what we're hoping to be doing, and we're hoping to have you guys who really want to, dig in on what the Boston School thinking is like and what we're really after. And, and then, of course, finding my read of it, my interpretation of it is obviously what we're doing. The other thing that I have to mention is that Sean and I Sean's being the counterpoint to this thing called Art Talk Radio. Sean is on his back. He's injured his back rather severely, and so we're out of it for another month. So I apologize for that, but I'm going to keep videos coming. Keep your questions coming. Thank you very much again to you guys, John Jensen, Benjamin Campbell, and Adam Choquette for keeping us going all this time. But keep the comments coming. Keep on subscribing. I love the numbers we're getting to. It's beautiful. It's just, I'm so grateful. I pictured this. I'd have been happy to have 600 people paying attention. But to have somewhere in the, and it would obviously be a significant number more than our subscribers. It's really exciting. And I hope you're getting as much out of this as I do, and how much, like this particular question today, it's something I don't often get the opportunity to talk through and think through. And so some of this was I was looking forward to seeing what I might have to say, I admit. And I had a whole series of other thoughts I could bring to this, things that just passed through my mind, and I realized I got to stay narrow and keep it down one track. So thank you again, Alan, for that comment. And by the way, Sean, I wish you well. I hope you're feeling better right away and can get up on, you're not laying there in misery. All right, we're out of here. I hope you guys have a great painting week. We'll see you in the next one.